Hello and welcome to Nothing But the Truth. For a decade and more, we've asked questions about Dr. Manmohan Singh. What sort of man is he? How does he take to politics? What sort of relationship does he have with Sonia Gandhi? Is he a caring father? Is he a good husband? My guest today is in the authoritative position to answer all those questions. She is Dr. Manmohan Singh's daughter, Daman Singh. Daman's biography of her parents, strictly personal, Manmohan and Gusharan, is published tomorrow, Sunday. But today, she's my exclusive guest. Daman Singh, let's start with the quarter century your father spent as a politician. It began in 1991 when P.C. Alexander dropped in and said that Narasimha Rao wanted to make him finance minister. You reveal in your book your father didn't take this seriously. What happened next?
Well, that's a really nice story. I think what actually happened was P.C. Alexander came. Narasimha Rao had told him to come and ask my father whether he was willing to take on this job of finance minister. And my father said, I guess, he said, yes, I am willing. And then after that, the entire day, there was no communication at all. So the next day, my father went to office as usual, and he thought, well, you know, they must have found somebody else. And he was working, and he got this frantic call saying, what are you doing at office? You should be at Rashtrapati Bhavan. We've been looking for you. So he put down the phone and he rushed home, he changed his clothes and he drove to Rashtrapati Bhavan. And he was sworn in as finance minister. Unfortunately, none of us could join him. None of us could be there when it happened.
Why could you not be there?
There was no time. It was all so rushed.
But had he told you that in fact he'd been invited to be finance minister, or had he, because he hadn't taken it seriously, held that back?
Well, I guess he would have told my mother, and my sister was staying with him at that time, so she would have known. I was living separately, so nobody bothered to give me a call and tell me.
So your father didn't pick up and tell all his daughters. He told those around, but he didn't think it was important to tell everyone else.
No, of course not. He doesn't tell people, he doesn't tell family what's going on at work. So we're quite used to that.
Your mother, did she go with him for the swearing-in?
I don't think so.
So in
Very
fact,
unlikely.
He went almost entirely on his own.
With his driver.
Now, as finance minister, your father was the architect of the economic reforms, and many people believe that that was perhaps his greatest achievement. You reveal in your book that he was already convinced that India had to go down the reform path. But how easy or difficult was it to convince Narasimha Rao?
Well, what I wrote in the book was that Narasimha Rao didn't have a fixed view on, what economic policy should look like. But obviously he came from a background which was very much rooted in a different kind of, economics. So my father had to convince him, and there wasn't much time because the union budget had to be presented within 1 month, and in that budget speech all the radical changes that were to be my father wanted to introduce, they had to be presented in that budget. So he had exactly 1 month to convince not only the Prime Minister but the cabinet colleagues and the party that this had to be done.
And was it an arduous process, your father, to convince the Prime Minister, or was it fairly easy?
I can't say. I didn't ask him that question. Difficult for me to say.
One of the things your father did tell you, and it's in your book, is that he was full of praise for the support he got from Narasimha Rao. He says, Narasimha Rao allowed the process of liberalization and opening up to go ahead and gave it its full support. Without his support, I could do nothing. And then he adds, when the time came for difficult things to be done, he stood by me.
Yeah, I think, a lot of us forget just how radical those changes were and just how much they questioned some very basic principles, some very basic policies, some very basic values that we were so used to. So it was really sort of a, sorry, I forgot. What was the question exactly?
The question was the importance of the support your father got from Narasimha Rao.
Yeah, so I guess, the Prime Minister who was leading the party, he was leading the cabinet, that support was absolutely vital.
And your father was always very grateful for that support.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. He had enormous respect for Rao Sahib.
In fact, more than respect, it seems from what your father told you that the two of them got on very well. Your father's told you, I found him a very warm person. I could converse with him freely, frankly. He was a father figure.
He was. I mean, that's how he saw him. I think he saw him as somebody with a lot of wisdom. And I think he also said at some point that it was Rao Sahib who was particularly keen, or, you know, that the reforms must be whatever. I shouldn't say people friendly, that sounds funny. I should not marginalize the poor. And that was a concern that the Prime Minister voiced very, very strongly.
Now, your father's first budget was revolutionary not just because it introduced these reforms, but also because of its literary style. He introduced the tradition of the Urdu couplets. He was famous, in fact, for that Victor Hugo quotation. What made him think of these literary flourishes?
You know, he's really well read. I think ever since his student days, he's been reading in Gurmukhi, he's been reading in Urdu, he's been reading in English, and he has a fantastic memory. And he just knows, he can quote anybody at the drop of a hat. You should try, test him sometime.
So this was his natural erudition just coming out?
Oh, absolutely. Mm.
Now, one of the surprising things he said to you, and it's in your book, about his time as finance minister, and I'm going to quote, is this: I enjoyed talking to the media. At the time, I did a lot of public speaking. The media was quite supportive. That's so different to the Manmohan Singh we got to know as Prime Minister.
Well, he hasn't changed. It's the media that has changed.
You mean the media became hostile and that's why he stopped speaking?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. I think in those days the media was just more interested in serious issues. And I think it was also much more capable of understanding serious issues.
So as the media became more frivolous or flippant in their attitude...
Your words, not mine.
But that's what you're suggesting, isn't it? As
I'm not suggesting anything.
As they stopped being serious, he withdrew himself.
I've said what I think. That's what I think. That's not what he thinks.
But did he enjoy talking to the media in the days when he was finance minister? Because that's clearly what he communicates.
I think he did. I think he enjoys intelligent conversation.
Now, in December 1993, your father resigned as finance minister because the JPC inquiring into the stock market scam had said that he had constructive responsibility to bear for the scam. You have a lovely story to tell about how Narasimha Rao handled that situation.
Yeah, actually there was a lot of pressure on him to resign for a really long time, and he didn't resign. But then this JPC report said that while he as an individual had not done anything wrong, he did have constructive responsibility. So as soon as that report came out, he just resigned. He sent in his resignation and he went home. And then he just stayed at home. And meanwhile, all the media people, I don't think you had OB vans then, I'm not sure. They were camping outside our house. And the stock market was going up and down, mostly down. And nobody knew what was happening because the Prime Minister didn't comment. And then on the 8th day, I think, the Prime Minister just sent his resignation letter back. There was no words were exchanged between them. And that was that. The next day my father went back to work.
This is fascinating. For 8 days the Prime Minister had your father's resignation and didn't say a word. He made no effort or attempt to persuade your father to withdraw it.
No.
And then 8 days later, he suddenly just sent the letter back, and that was the end of the matter.
Yep.
And on the 9th day, your dad went back to work.
That's the happy end.
Now, in 1999, your father stood for elections to the Lok Sabha. You revealed in your book that your mother wasn't in favor of this at all. You say his wife did not agree with him at all. Why was that?
You know, my father joined politics in 1991. But I think my mother was not really exposed to what it meant to be a politician. She knew what it meant for him to be finance minister, but you know, the whole process of fighting an election, that was completely unknown. You know, it was a completely new way of, I don't know, thinking or living.
It wasn't what she expected or wanted her husband to do?
No, I mean, none of us had ever thought that he would be out there on the streets, you know. He was a scholar, he was a professor. It took us a while to sort of adjust to the fact that he would have to go, you know, asking for votes, yeah.
You didn't as a family like the idea of Daddy having to go out and ask for votes?
I won't say that we didn't like it, but it was an unfamiliar idea. It took us a while to get used to it.
How long did it take your mother to get used to the fact that your father was now a full-time politician?
She isn't used to it yet.
Even now? She still sees him, and I presume prefers to see him as a scholar?
Absolutely.
So the politician Dr. Manmohan Singh, who was first finance minister and then for 10 years prime minister, is not how his wife likes to see him, really.
Well, you have to ask her. I don't know if, you know, she would put it that way, but well, that's how I see it.
And what about you and your sisters? When did you adjust to the fact that Daddy now was more than just a scholar? He was a very successful politician.
Was he a very successful politician?
You don't believe so?
I'm asking you.
No, I'm asking you now. I'm asking
fair.
you.
That's not fair. I think that I honestly believe that every profession needs good people, and so does politics.
What about my question?
What
is he a successful politician?
I think so, yeah.
In that election of 1999, when he contested for the Lok Sabha, he actually lost. How did he handle defeat?
He was deeply disappointed. It was really, I don't think he has lost anything ever in his life. You know, he was always the topper. He was always, you know, getting really, you know, rewarding jobs. He had never failed at anything. This was the first time in his life that he had so-called failed. So it was really hard. It was hard for him. It was hard for all of us.
Did the family need to get close and support him through this process?
Well, we visited a lot. By that time, my parents were living on their own, and you know, we were all sort of in different places. But yeah, we did visit a lot.
And you all rallied around to boost his morale?
Sure, of course, yeah.
And he needed a lot of morale boosting at that time?
I don't know if he needed it, but we gave it.
Now, what's interesting is your explanation for why he decided to contest that Lok Sabha election. You say this was because he believed in a democracy. It meant more to be elected directly by the people to the Lok Sabha. And after 8 years in politics, he felt it was time to seek a popular mandate for his views and his vision. Why then did he not contest a Lok Sabha seat when he was Prime Minister for 10 years?
I don't know. That's something you'll have to ask him. I've never asked him about this.
Do you think that it was the memory of that defeat in '99 and the personal trouble and doubts it had caused him that meant he didn't want to repeat the experience again?
I really can't say. You'll have to ask him.
You never asked him this question?
No.
Let's come to his years as Prime Minister. I know they're not actually an aspect of his life that your book covers. Your book stops actually in 2004. When he found out that Sonia Gandhi did not want to be Prime Minister herself and was going to make him Prime Minister, how did he feel? What was his reaction?
It's really hard for me to say what was his reaction, because I wasn't there and he didn't tell me what happened. I assume he felt honored to be given this opportunity to lead the government.
How did he break the news to your mother? Do you know?
You'll have to ask her.
How did you find out?
I guess they must have called. I don't really recall.
It's such an important seminal moment, one would think, in your father's life. And yet, you don't remember how he told you. Did he tell you, in fact?
I don't know. Maybe I saw it on TV. I don't know. I don't remember, honestly.
It's actually possible you found out your dad was going to be PM On TV?
No, 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 I'm just joking. I mean, my mother must have told all of us. It's her, she sees it as her duty to keep all of us up to date on what's going on, to the extent that she knows. So she must have called.
To the extent that she knows?
Yeah, she doesn't always know.
So an important thing like, I'm going to be Prime Minister, was not communicated by Dr. Manmohan Singh directly to his children. His wife may have done it.
I think that's likely. But if you ask my mother, she'll remember. She has a really powerful memory.
Did he enjoy being Prime Minister?
Again, you know, that's something you should ask him.
No, but you were his daughter. You can tell whether someone is enjoying it or not.
I think it was a challenge. It was a massive, massive challenge. And I think that he saw it as an honor and a privilege to take on that challenge.
He'd never been in that sort of position, although he'd been finance minister before. Did he ever at any point question whether he had the capacity as a politician to be Prime Minister? Was there ever a moment of self-doubt?
He's a very confident person. He likes to take on new things, and I think he believes in his own abilities very firmly.
So he has a lot of confidence in himself, and he knows that he can rise to any challenge. He's a very self-confident man, even though he's a very silent man.
Well, he certainly doesn't blow his own trumpet, but yes, he is very confident.
What about the criticism he constantly faced as Prime Minister, particularly in the second term? Did that hurt him, or by then had he developed a tough skin?
He has a tough skin.
What about your mother? When she heard this criticism, and it was there in the papers, it was there on television practically all the time. How did your mother respond to this criticism?
She doesn't have a tough skin. She's very sensitive. She feels very hurt.
So there was a lot of time when she'd be reading things in the papers or hearing them on TV about her husband, and she'd be deeply hurt.
She'd be deeply hurt, and I think what made things difficult was that she would say, look what today's newspaper said. Why are they saying this? And my father wouldn't explain what was behind it, you know. He never offered, he never told the other side of the story. He just said, you know, don't read the newspaper, forget it.
But his failure or his reluctance to tell the other side of the story didn't help your mother at all?
Yeah, so it was that's why she went through a very tough time, because she had to hear all these things, and she had to see, hear, watch. But she never got the full picture.
Did she hate the 10 years he spent as Prime Minister?
Well, hate is a very strong word. My parents don't use such strong language.
What word would you use?
It was difficult.
She didn't enjoy it?
Well, there were other aspects which she did enjoy.
L.K. Advani repeatedly used to publicly call your father the weakest Prime Minister ever. Was it easy for your parents to take that personal attack?
I think the first time he said it, it was very hurtful. But then when he went on and on saying it, it didn't really matter.
How would you describe your father's political relationship with Sonia Gandhi?
I wouldn't.
You need to. You're his biographer. You're not just his daughter. You've observed him. You've talked to him. How would you describe his relationship with Sonia Gandhi?
Well, you know, in my book, I don't talk about the last 10 years at all. So it's not something that I have either discussed with him or researched. I mean, if you have gone through my book, it is a extensively researched book. I don't give any off-the-cuff remarks. I don't make any sweeping statements. So if I haven't researched this topic, I will not write about it and I will not speak about it.
But you must have, as a daughter, observed your father and Sonia Gandhi. You must have thought about the relationship. You must have, as an intelligent biographer, some idea about how you'd characterize it.
Well, I met Mrs. Gandhi once. My father had just come home from the hospital. He underwent heart surgery in 2009, and Mrs. Gandhi came to see how he was. And I think I was in the room for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. She was very nice.
What about your father's relationship with Rahul Gandhi?
Again, that's not something I have either talked to him about or researched.
Last year, Rahul Gandhi contemptuously dismissed an ordinance your father was considering. He called it complete nonsense. He said it should be torn up and thrown away. At the time, it was widely interpreted as a slap on your father's face. How did your father see that incident?
I wasn't there when it happened. I think I was traveling or something. I was not in town. So I actually missed that whole episode, and when I came back to Delhi, it had sort of blown over. So I didn't really get the full story.
Did it upset your parents?
It must have.
Both of them?
Yeah, things upset my mother more.
But this time around, did it also affect your father as well?
I don't know, I wasn't there, so it's really hard to say.
But your mother was upset?
Well, if it was said about me, I would be upset. So, I mean, they're human, so I assume they were upset.
Did she discuss this with you?
No. We have lots of other things to talk about, you know.
At the time, many people commented publicly that perhaps your father should resign. Did he consider resigning at this point of time?
I don't know. If he did consider resigning, he certainly didn't tell me.
But it's possible he might have.
Anything is possible.
Were there times during the 10 years he was Prime Minister when he considered resigning?
You know, he must have, because I recall when he was Finance Minister, he used to go around with his resignation letter in his pocket. And I think that's probably the literal truth. So he has always been ready to, if the situation demands it, he is ready to, put in his papers.
You're suggesting that if as Finance Minister he literally went around with his resignation letter in his pocket, he's bound to have had at least the same attitude to resignation when he was Prime Minister as well.
And what I mean to say is that if necessary, if he feels it really necessary to resign, he will, as nothing will stop him.
He wasn't particularly fond of sticking to the job.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
He didn't believe that he had to just finish a term because he was there. If something came up and he felt it was morally right to resign, he would have resigned.
Well, you know, this morally right, I'm not too sure what it really means.
But the point I'm asking is, if there was an occasion when he felt he had to resign, he would have resigned.
Yeah, I think so.
Were there moments when you think he agonized over this issue? After all, you would have perhaps known as a daughter.
No, I wouldn't. I don't live with my parents, so that's something you should ask my mother.
Did your mother ever mention occasions when she thought your father was considering the idea of resigning?
No.
My last question before I take a break. Is your father considering writing a book? Is he considering writing his memoirs?
I think he should. I'm not sure if he is, but I think he should, because there is so much wisdom and knowledge and experience that it would be, I think, a service.
I'm interested and intrigued by the way you began that answer. I'm not sure if he is. That suggests he might be writing a book.
He might be. Everybody is writing a book these days. Why not him?
That sounds like a very positive answer to me. And you're nodding your head.
Think what you like.
You're not just his daughter, you're also in this instance his biographer. Has he been misunderstood by contemporary public opinion?
I think public opinion is a very sort of transient thing. It changes minute to minute, it changes. So it's really hard to put a finger on what it is at any point of time.
When he left office after 10 years as Prime Minister, you would have known as a family he wasn't a popular Prime Minister who was leaving office. Was that upsetting for you?
It was upsetting because he had worked so hard and he had worked so selflessly, and it was sad that the work that he did was not being appreciated.
He deserved better from public opinion.
I think so.
Did this upset him as well?
You'll have to ask him.
What about your mother?
She will be able to explain it much better. I shouldn't sort of speak for them. I'm not their spokesperson.
But it sounds as if she was upset.
She must have been.
Let's take a break at that point. When I come back, Daman Singh, I want to talk to you about the personal side of your father's life. What sort of man is he? What sort of father? How caring a husband? All of that in a moment's time. Don't go away. Welcome back to Nothing But the Truth and an exclusive interview with Dr. Manmohan Singh's daughter Daman Singh, whose biography of her parents, Strictly Personal, Manmohan and Gusharan, is published tomorrow. Today she's my guest. In part 1 we talk about her father's political life. Now in part 2 we shall talk about Dr. Manmohan Singh's personal life. Let's come, Daman Singh, to your father's personal life. He lost his mother when he was literally just a wee baby, and thereafter he was brought up by his paternal grandmother. You write, his favorite stories are about his grandmother. The mere mention of her name always lights up his face.
That's true. My father, you know, the first 10, 11 years of his life, he was living with his grandparents in their village. And he had a very deep affection for both his grandparents. And they were more like his parents. You know, when we were growing up, we were always hearing stories about Meri Dadi used to say this, Meri Dadi used to cook that, and it's something that it always brings a smile to his face.
So he really adored his dadi.
Absolutely adored her, yeah.
She took the role of mother in his life.
Not, in fact, during the first 11 years he was with his grandparents, but even later his grandmother lived with the family, you know, till the age, I think he was about 20-something when she passed away. So it was a very, you know, long and very close association, and it's something that I think is very important for him.
Even now in his 80s?
Yes, of course. If you care for somebody, you don't stop caring just because you're 80.
No, what I meant was that those memories are important to him now. He cherishes them still. Now, although he was by no means an only child, I get the impression from your book that he was often a loner as a teenager. You write that he used to love exploring places often on his own, particularly gurdwaras.
He used to just sort of wander off on his own, whether it was in his village Gaon, whether it was in Chakwal town, whether it was in Peshawar. I think he has a great sense of being an explorer. And in fact, you know, in the book I talk about how then he moved, of course, to Amritsar, to Hoshiarpur, to Chandigarh, to Geneva, to New York, to Oxford, to Cambridge, and every new place was, I think, an adventure. It was an adventure for him.
He's a curious, inquisitive person.
Yeah, I think so.
And he likes to find out and see for himself. I'm fascinated by this teenager's curiosity about gurdwaras. Is he a particularly religious person?
Actually, my parents are both deeply spiritual people, and for them, I think the Guru Granth Sahib represents infinite wisdom and a huge source of solace. So they really rely on the book a lot.
Does your father read from the book every day?
Well, you know, he has memorized large sections of it. I don't think he needs to read.
He knows it by heart?
Not the whole book. It's very long. But he knows, he has his favorite passages and he knows them by heart, yeah.
He draws a lot of comfort and solace from his faith.
Absolutely, yeah.
In difficult moments when he was finance minister and particularly when he was prime minister, would religion be a source of solace and comfort?
Well, he prays. He does pray. He prays in good times and he prays in difficult times, yeah.
And he's regular about praying?
I don't know about regular. You'll have to ask him. I don't know everything about him, you know.
Now, his family, it emerges from your book, was one of the true victims of partition. His grandfather died in the riots, and at least two of his relatives burnt themselves to death rather than be abducted.
That was actually, again, you know, growing up, we never discussed partition in the family. And when I was writing this book, it was the first time that I became aware that it actually affected our family. And then when I started reading up, you know, it is chilling. It is chilling what happened in those days.
When your father in your book speaks to you about what happened to his family, particularly his relatives who burnt themselves to death, he does it in very matter-of-fact terms. Is that because the memories are so sharp that it's the only way of protecting yourself?
Well, from what I've read, I've read many first-person accounts, and that is what has generally happened, that people can't talk about it. I don't know if my father has other reasons for being so matter-of-fact, but that is a very normal response.
You had to draw these stories out of him.
Absolutely. It was not easy. He did not want to talk about it.
It's a chapter of his life that he'd rather close and leave behind.
He's always looking ahead. He prefers not to look back.
Now, your parents had an arranged marriage, but you also say that he made up his mind in just half an hour. You say he was completely smitten by your mother.
That's what my mother said.
What did your dad say?
He said she was all right.
That's it. Just all right.
She's all right.
And how did your mother like being described as just all right?
Well, my mother's very, she takes these things in her stride.
She's used to it.
Maybe.
But what is your conclusion? Is your mother right when she says he was smitten by her?
I can imagine so. I can imagine my father as a young man. And if you see the photographs of my mother as a young woman, I think any man would be smitten.
Now, there's a very amusing story you tell about their engagement. Your dad turned up, but your mum wasn't there.
It wasn't actually an engagement, because I think in those days they didn't really have an engagement ceremony. But my father did say, I want to come over with a ring. And she said, he said, on so-and-so day. And she said, well, sorry, I'm going on a college picnic that day. Come some other day. And he didn't listen. So he came over with the ring and waited. And she went off on her college picnic and came back. And then she said, well, thank you very much for the ring, but couldn't you have come at a better time?
Now, your father is not the sort of man who easily confides in people. He doesn't easily unburden himself of his inner thoughts. You say that even as a husband, he wouldn't tell his wife what sort of day he'd had at work. In fact, there's a line from your book, he told her nothing about what happened at work.
As a rule, he tells her nothing. But I should say that when things get really bad, he does tell her.
But things have to get really bad.
Yeah, yeah.
Is he naturally secretive, or is it just that he's non-communicative about these things? Or does it just not occur to him to share what happened at work with his wife?
He has this line between work and home, and he crosses it very, very rarely.
So these are two different worlds for him. And your mother belongs to the world of home. She has nothing to do with the world of work.
That's right.
Did she resent or dislike this compartmentalization and the fact that she was kept in one world, had no room in the other?
You'll have to ask her. But if I were to, you know, look at it, I think it's important to have that line, but I think it would also be nice to cross it more often.
And therefore you're saying that your mother must have wanted to cross it more often than she did?
I guess so.
Now, you say in your book that your mother was very keen on learning music, but you add that your father wasn't particularly encouraging.
You know, my sisters and I, we used to always scold him for this, that, you know, why don't you encourage her more, and why don't you, you know, take more interest in what she's learning and how she's singing, etc. I think that he is a person who has never needed encouragement of any sort. And I think he just assumes that nobody else really needs encouragement. They should find it from, you know, within.
His confidence in the way he looked upon himself as a person who can do it without being encouraged made him believe that others didn't need encouragement either.
That's how I see it.
Did your mother feel sorry that she didn't get that encouragement? Did it hurt her at times?
It did.
Did that affect the marriage or the relationship?
I don't know. You should ask them.
Don't know or won't tell?
I don't think that is a sort of central theme in their marriage.
Now, as a father, and you write this in your book, you say he was detached from his children, which became most clear when you saw how much time he would make for other people's children. I want to read a bit of your book. Various friends would send their children to my father for inspiration and guidance. No matter how busy he was, he always found time for this and seemed to enjoy it. Yet nothing of the sort would happen at home. He had very little idea of what was going on in our lives. And then you add, even if his lack of time was excusable, his lack of engagement was not. Although his affection and concern was never in doubt, there was always a certain detachment.
You know, my father gave us his values. He gave us the principles he held. He gave us an enormous amount of freedom, freedom of what to think, what to do, what to wear, where to go. There were no boundaries that he imposed upon us. Yet I do believe that it would have been nicer if he had given us, if he had been a little more involved in our growing up years.
You felt the absence of daddy?
Well, I won't say I was a neglected child, because I had a mother who was, you know, a super mother. So
she made up for him.
I think she compensated to a, you know, large degree.
Why do you think he was so detached from his children? Is it just the way he is as a person, or was he too busy at work?
I don't know. Hard to say.
Did it hurt you and your sisters that when you wanted daddy sometimes he wasn't there? Often he wasn't there.
I think we sort of adjusted very early. We adjusted, you know, as small children, that my father was always at work. Very rarely. Well, he was at home at meal times, of course. But he was always at work. Maybe I think we just sort of took that for granted.
Daddy wasn't there to play with his daughters. Daddy wasn't there to laugh and take them to the park or to the movies or whatever.
He took us to bookshops, and we did go out to restaurants together, yeah.
Are you and your sisters close to your father?
We are a very close family, all 5 of us, and then when you add all the men who have married into our family, and the sons-in-law and grandchildren, I think put together we are a very close family.
Was he a good father?
It's hard for me to say, you know. I mean, say for instance, I have one son and he's 19 years old, and I know I've tried really hard to be a good mother, but if I ask my son, am I a good mother, what do you think he's going to say?
It sounds as if you're making up for the detachment you had from your father by ensuring there isn't that separation with your son.
No such, you know. I think today's generation is just much more, has a different perspective on parenting than the previous generation had.
But I come back to my question. Was your father a good father?
Yes, of course he was good.
Has he been a good husband?
That you have to ask my mother.
Why won't you answer?
How can I say whether he is a good husband?
You would have observed, you would have thought about it.
No, that's not fair.
Is there a certain hesitation in saying yes?
Yes.
There is a certain hesitation in saying yes, you're being honest.
No, he is a good husband. You wanted an answer, so that's your answer.
Just like what happened at partition, your family also suffered quite horribly in 1984. Not only your uncles and nieces, but you almost had your own home in Ashok Vihar burnt down. What exactly happened?
Actually, nothing very much. At that time, my father, my mother, and my younger sister, they lived in Bombay. My father was the governor of the Reserve Bank, and I was studying in Gujarat, and my elder sister had just got married, and she and her husband were staying in our house in Ashok Vihar. So when the riots started, Ashok Vihar was one of the affected areas, and so a mob of people came to our gate and wanted to enter it and burn it down. And then my brother-in-law went out. It so happens that my brother-in-law is not a Sikh, so he tried to convince them not to do this, and then he said that the house did not belong to a Sikh family. It was his house, and he was a Hindu. So this satisfied the mob, and they went on their way.
So your brother-in-law had to lie to protect the house?
Yeah. The sad thing was that there were some people, we knew some of the people in that mob.
You mean you knew them personally?
Well, they weren't our friends, but we knew who they were.
And yet they'd come to burn the house?
Yeah.
That must have been quite shaking for your parents.
Not just my parents. I think it was most shaking for my sister and my brother-in-law, because they were the ones who were face to face. You know, we were all in different cities.
So 84 has left a searing imprint on the Manmohan Singh family.
It was a ghastly time for thousands and thousands of people. But there are ways to deal with it.
One of the most moving moments of your father's time as Prime Minister was when in 2005 in Parliament, in almost emotional terms, he apologized for 1984. If I recall his words correctly, he says, "We hang our heads in shame." I guess those words reflected, in a very real sense, what your family had gone through.
I think he wasn't speaking, it wasn't what our family had been through, it was what the Sikh community had been through, and it was what the nation had been through. I don't think he saw it as a personal experience. I think he saw it as a national tragedy. That's how he saw it. And I remember watching that speech on TV. My sense is that he had to struggle to find the strength and the wisdom to say the right thing, and it was not a prepared speech. It was extempore. I found it very, 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 very moving. I think it's one of the most moving speeches he's ever given. In fact, I should point out, you know, that in my book there is a chapter on 1984. It is a very short chapter, and it doesn't really say very much. I didn't want to force my parents to say something so that I could write it down and so that I could put it in my book. I thought that was just, it would have been cruel to do that.
It would have rekindled memories that are best left dormant.
Yeah, I do think that.
But that speech in 2005 was not an easy speech for your father to make at all.
Not at all.
There's a point in your book where you say that your father admits to you he doesn't have many friends. But the truth is both your father and your mother have forged a close and deep friendship with Montek and Ishar Ahluwalia. You write in your book, the Ahluwalias were virtually the only couple with whom my parents socialized.
Well, this is specifically in relation to the time that my father was finance minister. It was a very tense time. I don't think my parents socialized much. I don't think my father never had the time to socialize, and I'm sure neither did Montague have the time to socialize. And you know, it was I can't explain what it was like, but it was like this sort of crusade, economic reforms. They thought about nothing else. They talked about nothing else. So when it came to socializing, it was my father, my parents, and the Ahluwalias. They just sort of naturally came together, and it deepened their relationship a great deal.
In fact, of your father and Montague, you write, they shared not just a mutual respect, but also complete trust.
That's true. My father and Montague have known each other as economists since the 70s. They only started working together in 1991, and somewhere along the way they became really good friends, and they remain very good friends. And of course they agree on a lot of things. They also disagree on a lot of things, but that trust, that respect, that friendship, that remains irrespective.
But in fact, the bond that was really special was the one between your mother and Ishar Ahluwalia. You say of this friendship, Ishar has a very special place in my mother's world. She can be told the kind of things that cannot be mentioned to anyone else. She is friend, confidant, sister, and more. My mother values her opinion above that of everyone else in her life.
That's true. My mother and Ishar are like sisters, and I'm really happy for that, you know, because I have two sisters, and for me a world without my sisters is unimaginable. So I mean, I believe that everybody deserves a sister.
And Ishar is that sister for your mother?
She is.
But is Ishar also something else? Is she the confidant that perhaps your father couldn't be because he doesn't confide easily? Does Ishar make up for that?
She does.
Does that at all worry your father? That
No,
the
not at all.
confidence that he doesn't share with his wife, that she gets from Ishar?
I don't think so. You see, it's not like my father is close to Montague and my mother is close to Ishar. It's also a cross. My father is close to Ishar and my mother is close to Montague. So it's like a group of four people who just have a very special relationship.
Now that your father stopped being Prime Minister, how does he fill his days?
Well, you know, he used to have a very punishing schedule, and I think just, you know, not having your schedule worked out for you on a daily basis is a huge relief. So he's reading a lot, he's meeting a lot of people, and now he's free to meet whom he wants, as much as he wants, when he wants. That sort of freedom he never had before.
But are there moments when perhaps he's bored with the amount of time on his hands to do what he wants?
Well, it's only been 2 months, so it's too early to say.
Are there things in his life that your father is particularly proud of? Is there one thing that stands out of which he would say, that was a proud achievement?
Again, you know, that's something you should ask him, but I think he's proud to have served his country for 50 years, the last 50 years.
He's particularly proud of the fact that in a variety of roles, Chief Economic Advisor, Finance Secretary, Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, Finance Minister, Prime Minister, he served the country.
I think he is.
He has an old-fashioned belief in service to the nation.
He does.
That matters a lot to him.
It does.
Is there something that he deeply regrets?
He has no regrets as far as I can tell. He's always looking ahead.
No regret at all?
Well, you know, if you force me to think really hard, then maybe he does. But that's his general attitude. Ki jo ho gaya, so ho gaya. Now let's look ahead.
So he's not a man who dwells on mistakes.
He learns from his mistakes and he moves forward.
Does he acknowledge his mistakes, or does he just push them to the back of his mind?
I'm sure he acknowledges them to himself, because he has a very analytical mind. He is constantly analyzing. that can be a good thing and a bad thing. So he can't let any experience go without analyzing it first.
Would your father be happy with the book you've written?
I think so. I mean, he wouldn't agree with everything that I've written. That would be asking for too much. But I think, yes, he would be happy.
Have your parents read the book?
Well, they did see a draft.
And your father is happy for you to tell the world that there were times when he was detached, that perhaps he didn't encourage his wife, that he didn't share confidence. Those are very personal things that you brought out. Would he be happy for the world to know them?
Well, he's a very liberal person, and as I said, as a daughter, I have the freedom to do what I wish, and he respects that freedom. So he wouldn't stop me.
My last question. You're both daughter and biographer. Is there a conflict in those two roles? Is it easy to be a biographer who's also a daughter?
I think being a daughter gave me access, and that access is very difficult. But being a daughter also meant that I was writing about issues that affected not just, the people I was writing about, but they affected me too.
But being a biographer meant that you had to analyze things that sometimes daughters don't do. And when you analyze things, you come to conclusions that daughters might not find immediately acceptable.
Well, I'm not only a daughter, I'm also a writer. And I think I have been as honest as I could have. I'm quite satisfied with that. I think everything in this book is true. It is not the whole truth, but it is all true.
Daman Singh, a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.